Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Ukraine Update on M Compass Media with John Moran. I'm your host, Finbar Markey. Every week I'm joined by John Moran, former head of the foreign desk for the Irish Press, who will give us an update on the developments in the NATO, US, Ukraine, Russia war. It's hard to include everybody that's involved at this stage in the title of the war. John gives us a fulsome update every week, and then I'll have a little bit of a Q&A session with him at the end. Thanks for joining us again this week, John.
Okay, Finbar.
What have you got for us?
Well, this week we have a fairly busy week because there's a lot going on. First of all, Russia is continuing its offensive across all areas of the front, from Kherson in the north, from Kherson in the south to Kharkov in the north. They're testing Ukrainian defenses and pushing on where they find weaknesses in the Ukrainian defense. So essentially what we have is a war of attrition in which Ukraine is losing very heavily. On some days, losses on the entire front can amount to 1,000 men in one day. One major exception to the war of attrition, however, has taken place around Bakhmut, where the Russians have made major advances. There already is an operational encirclement in the infamous Bakhmut meat grinder. The Wagner forces are pushing very hard here, and a full encirclement of the city is expected perhaps within hours. It's unclear how many Ukrainian soldiers are left in the city. You can get varying estimates from 3,000 to over 10,000. But if a cauldron is created with no option to escape, the city's garrison is doomed to surrender or fight to the last man. US military advisors have been advising Ukraine to surrender the city for weeks now. But Zelensky has resisted this plan because he believes holding Bakhmut for as long as possible offers time for military supplies, such as tanks, to arrive from NATO. After seeming initially to be successful in receiving tanks from the EU and NATO, however, it now looks more like it will take quite a long time for many of them to arrive, as it appears that some of those who have committed to sending tanks have now given a much longer and delayed period for their arrival. The United States Abrams won't be here for at least a year. Incidentally, last night there was great excitement coming from the Wagner group around Bakhmut, because word came in that Leopard tanks had been seen in Chasiv Yar, which is not far from Bakhmut. It's on a high ground and it's held by the Ukrainians. The reason for the excitement is people in the West just have no idea of how much Russia has a hatred for the whole Nazi idea, whether that's from 1939 to 45 or today. And they are straining at the leash to get at these tanks, not only because they want to do it, they say, I bagged a German tank, but there's also huge rewards being offered by various businessmen for anyone who bags a Leopard tank. So there's huge enthusiasm on the Russian side for hitting these tanks if they come. Such is the hatred of them. Because remember, the Panther tanks in World War II, better known as Panzers, are a very recent memory to many, many people. So this is a huge thing, which I don't think is fully realized in the West. It's just an idea, but because they don't hear the Russian side of the story, they don't get the full message. Now, one of the main reasons I do this is because as a journalist, I'm horrified at the coverage of this particular war. And I think it'll be looked back on as a disaster for journalism, where you're only allowed to talk about one side of the story. It's just not good enough. So that's the reason I do this, because people can get a fuller idea of what's going on. And it's a protest against the banning of one side of a story, not just in this situation, but in any situation. We always get every side we can in every story. That's our job. And we've deliberately accepted that we're not doing this on this occasion. And that's outrageous to me.
Yeah. John, you have more news out of Ukraine this week?
I have, yeah. No, I was just going to add that these tanks that are supposed to be coming, I have noticed in the past week or so, there is a problem. It looks to me as if some of the European NATO countries are getting cold feet about the prospect of putting German tanks in Ukraine against Russia. I think they're having second thoughts, and if they are, that's a very good thing.
And you made the point a few minutes ago that the number of tanks that are accessible to the Ukrainians at the moment and into the near future is minimal. And really, it just the whole tank thing at the moment seems to be symbolic more than anything else on both sides. The symbolism that you described earlier on the Russian side of these tanks rolling in, the last time it happened was 1942, 3 probably. So these tanks
Yeah.
rolling in. And on the other hand, the symbolism for NATO and for Ukraine, that this assistance, this is the symbol of continuation of assistance. Is it all just pie in the sky symbolism, the whole tank thing? This war is going to go as this war is going to go, irrespective of these few tanks.
No, it's not, because the fathers and grandfathers of Ukrainians fought in the war. And it must be stated that the great majority of them fought against Nazis, not for Nazis. It was basically around the Galicia region in the far west of Ukraine, where all the pro-Nazi stuff was. And indeed, at one stage during the Second World War, um, von der Leyen's grandfather was there. And while he was there, it was declared Judenfrei, free of Jews. So I'm trying to emphasize that this happened in a small area of Ukraine. And, rather than thinking of Ukraine and everyone being, one side, it's not as simple as that.
Yeah. But the material benefit of these new materials, these new tanks, I think we'll agree is going to be limited in terms of just the massive structure of the Russian military and its propensity and capacity to continually produce. These few tanks coming from the West are not going to really sway the war either way. That's the point I'm making. Would you agree with that, or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, maybe what they can do is, when they weather this storm, when they lose Donbass and they get prepared for another defense, and I think they have some seasoned reserves that they're holding back for such an eventuality. Now, I think at that stage, those forces will be given all these new materials to help them at that stage. But it could be all over by then, in my view.
Yeah. And there's other developments you wanted to talk about tonight as well, John?
Yeah, see, around this part of Europe, and it's a reason I always say why we should never get involved in stuff over there, because they're basically a constantly changing patchwork quilt of borders that come and go and different ethnic groups win out or lose out and all of that. And that's what happens. Now, one of these countries is a sliver of land all along the side of Moldova before it doesn't reach Ukraine. So it's sort of between Moldova and Ukraine, a tiny sliver. But Russia has peacekeeping forces there. But more importantly, they have massive amounts of ammunition that were stored there. And it's absolutely enormous. And as you probably know, at this stage, Ukraine is struggling with ammunition at this stage. So if they get it into their heads that if we get this ammunition, we'll be okay, but they'll have gone across a border, and we don't know what happens at that stage. We don't know Moldova's position, what they will be after that. So that's a wild card. And I would add that I think now that Zelensky is under such very, very heavy pressure that I think he's capable of doing wild acts that could lead to unintended consequences. That's one thing that would worry me there.
I did note last week that a very senior Ukrainian figure in government was, through Twitter commentary, egging Moldova on to invade Transnistria, and to foment something or to kick something off that would bring everything, I believe, to a whole other level. In Moldova itself, there are protests in the streets. I've seen American programming like CNBC, I think it was, trying to put these protests over as protests against the government for high prices. But I've also seen the reality that these protests are actually about NATO and about peace, and demanding that the new Moldovan government, which seems to be very swayed towards the United States, that these protests are to try to stop them from escalating this and getting Moldova dragged into a war as well. Have you seen anything about those demonstrations?
I have, yeah, but they are anti-government, Moldovan government demonstrations, and they want no part of the conflict in Ukraine. They want to keep Moldovans away from that. I saw a very funny one yesterday. I mean, there were thousands of these people. And I saw a Ukrainian video last night where they were saying all these people have been paid by Russia. It just, ridiculous nonsense.
And then
But no,
the American media trying to make it look like these are protests about something completely different.
Well, see, and again, the problem becomes, when you only give one side, you become on one side.
But they're not even giving one side. They're actually clearly lying and misleading people. It's not even a case that they're just giving one side.
But it's because they have joined that side.
Yeah.
They want what they're saying to be true, but it's not true. There's a lot of that, what the Russians call copium.
Right, okay. And tell me, how do you think this Moldova thing is going to pan out?
Well, it's one of these things that if he makes a decision to go in, and if they go in, then, anything can happen. I don't know how the Russians would react, but they certainly wouldn't stand for it. And my first thought would be the first thing they'll go for is the munitions. If Ukraine comes in and they go towards where the munitions are, I'm sure the Russians would swiftly dispose of them.
Yeah, I think there'll be a plan in place. They'll probably do what Churchill did with the fleet down in the south of France and just scuttle the whole thing rather than allow the enemy to have it. That could be the case. John, you have more news again?
Yes, the other matter I wanted to bring up this evening is the question of Donetsk and the daily bombing of the city, which has only gotten worse since Ukraine began losing positions around Donetsk, like Avdiivka, which is under attack at the moment. It was a major attack point against Donetsk. And as these areas are being attacked, what the Ukrainians are doing is they're attacking Donetsk in revenge. So during the week, what we had on one day was an attack on an ambulance that had arrived to a scene of a bombing a few minutes previously. And there were 4 killed in that. 2 female and 2 male medical workers were killed in that. The following day, there was 14 people killed in attacks on the next city in various bombings. The first bombing, according to local Donetsk people, was from a HIMARS. And if so, this is even worse than I would have thought, because it would have meant that the US okayed the attack on the ambulance with the HIMARS, which would be outrageous. The US okays all HIMARS attacks. So if it okayed this attack on medical people coming to assist injured people, injured civilians, it's just unthinkable.
And this was a modus operandi that was developed by the Israelis, I believe, this idea of the double tap
Yes.
to wiping people out. So they're learning stuff from the Israelis as well. The attacks on Donetsk city, and we've mentioned them before on the Ukraine update, there's no design in them to have a military outcome. They seem to be purely about terrorizing the people of Donetsk city, dropping petal mines, which is an explosive device which disperses hundreds of little mines that actually would look attractive to a child. And people are walking along, they're very difficult to see. So many people losing limbs, children being killed by these mines. I've seen so many videos, so many photographs of people being taken in by ambulance with their limbs hanging off, sometimes missing, because of these mines, which are illegal. But it seems to be okay. It's okay to do anything.
No, they're not legal. And those butterfly bombs, I think there's a Canadian convention. I don't know if it's the Ottawa Convention or something of that title that has them banned. I'll double check that for you, but as far as I'm aware, they are banned.
Yeah, they're illegal, and that's the point I was making. But it seems to be okay once it's been done to the people who are on the other side, as it were. I don't like using that phrase. It's just, it's an absolute disgrace. John, we want to look at some video footage here.
Okay.
A church in Ukraine that is being seized by the Ukrainian state, using the military to seize the church. We'll just have a look at this video for a little second and then we'll come back. So that was the Ukraine military seizing a Russian Orthodox church in Ukraine, which was the dominant religion, but it would appear that the state of Ukraine, a little bit like Germany in the late 1930s, has decided to create its own religion amongst everything else. And it is seizing the religious property, just like happened in Germany in the 1930s, of another religion. What's your commentary on that, John? What's your thoughts on it yourself?
Again, it's outrageous, and it's just linked to the fact that the top man in the church happens to be based in Moscow, the Moscow patriarch, and that's what is bothering them. I mean, you must remember, from the time Ukrainians are small, this has happened over the past 20, 25 years. The books have been changed. They're getting stuff that are poisoning the minds of the kids. They sing songs about death to the Moscows, knife the Moscows. I mean, young kids. And this is hammered into them, not all over Ukraine, but in certain parts of Ukraine. And it has happened more and more in the past 20 years. And now we're seeing the full fruition of this, because the end game of the whole Ukrainian mess was to damage Russia. And they've tried that. They thought it would work better than it actually did. And they're now suffering because of that. And what I think is happening is, again, another kick the cat. If you can't take on your adversary, take it out against something else. And anything that has any hint of Russian will do. I mean, you've seen them tied up against lampposts for speaking Russian in many, many parts. It's an anti-Russian thing.
The fact that our media are ignoring this, and it would appear, we're told that the UN says X, the UN says Y, but we're usually told that through our media that's quite corrupted. And when you look at it in detail, you find that the UN actually made a statement that was quite different from it. What's your take on the fact that even when it comes to human rights abuses, even when it comes to activities that are clearly totalitarian in nature, that clearly reflect other times in human history that we've all been brought up to reject as abhorrent, and yet our media today not only are concealing what's going on in Ukraine, but are in fact adding to the fire of hatred of Russians and of general people who, some of the people in Ukraine who are fighting against the Kiev regime don't see themselves as Russian either. They do see themselves as Ukrainian. And that's what you were saying earlier about this mix. So I don't like to say, there's a lot of Ukrainians out there that are resistant to what's happening at the moment as well. So what do you say to our media who are just flagrantly ignoring, if not upholding, human rights abuses in Ukraine at the moment?
Well, I mean, what can you say? I mean, if they have decided to not write anything that might paint Ukraine in a bad light, that's a very dangerous position to take. And it's one they have taken. The Ukrainian army is riven with neo-Nazis. That's a fact. They are whole Nazi regiments. Azov, Kraken, Aidar, there are lots of them. And this aspect is denied. So if you have a media that's denying facts and not looking at other facts and only giving you curated facts, that's a very dangerous situation.
And the irony...
what worries me even more is that the people in the mainstream media, the ones who, the narrative enforcers, if you like, don't want that narrative interrupted by anyone. I mean, there isn't a day goes by, but they're banging on about Twitter this and Twitter that, and it's a hellhole and all of that. It's almost as if no one ever told them about the block button. If someone is nasty to you, you just block them. It's not something you have to listen to. But the mainstream media have a problem with Twitter because it interferes with their narrative.
Yeah, and that's the truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
You were blocked off Twitter for a little while yourself there, for telling the truth, but you're back on it again.
And I'm back again, yeah.
Yeah, you can be accessed there as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can get me on Twitter at Rue Danger.
Yeah. In the meantime, there's still more news coming out, because there is resistance growing right across Europe and even beyond Europe from what I can measure and gather. It's been suppressed again in the mainstream media, but we had major protests in Paris. There's been major protests in Germany. Here in Dublin, there was a protest 4 weeks ago at the British Embassy about their part in escalating this war. There was only about 30, 40 people at that demonstration at the most. And I think, if I'm honest, I was probably counting the guards there too. There on Saturday, there was another demonstration on O'Connell Street in front of the GPO, and there was at least 100 people attended it, which is a small number. But when you're magnified that out for a small country and a building movement, there does seem to be a movement building. You sent me a video earlier, John, of Bismarck, the German chancellor, one of the first German chancellors, I think, after uniting Prussia and all the smaller states. The grandson of Bismarck was at a demonstration last week in Ramstein, where a tank had been placed in front of the Russian embassy as a taunt to the Russian embassy, but with Ukrainian flags on it. But what happened was people came along and took those flags off and covered it in flowers. Before we look at this video of Bismarck's grandson, do you want to do an introduction to it?
Just one thing. It's there were two separate demonstrations in Germany. In fact, there were a lot more. One was in Ramstein, which is the enormous US base from which everything that is happening in Ukraine is being organized. And the other was in Berlin, where the Ukrainians brought a destroyed Russian tank outside the Russian embassy as a taunt or whatever it may be. And within 4 hours, locals had filled the tank with roses. There were roses all over it. They came and the Ukrainian people left. They tried to stop them. The Ukrainians tried to throw the flowers off the tank, but there were so many people there, they couldn't do it and they had to leave themselves. That was a really great expression of a Europe that I would like to see, where we don't jump anytime an American president says something. And I say that in particular around this time of year because I'm always wary when Leo or Martin go over to the United States for the 17th of March, because the last time Michal went over, he came back shouting about India, get off the fence. Somebody prepped him for that. Michal doesn't come up with something like that and then just lash it out. Somebody wound him up in New York for him to do that. The British have always said to the Americans that they're stupid to give us St. Patrick's Day without getting something from it. Well, I have a suspicion that Joe Biden has been looking for something, certainly got something last year. I think he thought he was going to get an end to Irish neutrality. And I think that was the move that was attempted by Martin when he came back. I remember in one outburst where he said, we're not neutral. He wanted to be not neutral, but he had to accept eventually that we are. Mm-hmm. And now I see Leo is talking about accepting neutrality, but there was a mention of a word. In fact, there was a word in it that was for the moment or something like that. It wasn't that we were neutral, in perpetuity, but we're neutral for the moment. And, I'm very, very wary of Leo and his WEF links. And these individuals will be trying to get us into NATO. I don't like Irish politicians being told what to do by unelected individuals, nameless individuals at the head of the WEF and all of this. I think it's awful. Yeah. And that sort of thing will have to stop, because you can't have ministers running off to the WEF who boasts that they have a reach inside the cabinets of many governments. I don't want these people to have that reach inside our government. And I don't think the Irish people believe.
Our governance and our decision-making processes could not be further from the people. I have a great belief in the idea that we should be able to reach out and touch the people who make decisions that impact our lives, just to be able to have them in a community. I mean, that you can, but the idea that we don't even know who they are is problematic. Yes. Just coming back to the developing protest movement, we're going to show the video of Bismarck's grandson now. After that, there was also a demonstration in Israel. The Israeli position with regard, well, we won't even talk about that yet. We'll just have a look at these two videos first.
Also ganz wichtig, wir haben hier 2000 Rosen besorgt, den Panzer zu beschmücken, damit endlich unsere Regierung miteinander verhandelt mit den anderen. Nicht immer nur Waffen liefern, sondern auch, dass man mal diplomatische Beziehungen hat und nicht alles immer kappt. Das ist das Allerwichtigste. Man muss miteinander reden, weil wir sind keine Feinde. Weder gegen die Ukraine noch gegen die Russen. Wir sind Freunde. Und das haben wir 30 Jahre aufgebaut.
In that first video, we saw Bismarck's grandson talking what seemed to be very peace-laden and peaceful and sensible words and rational words about trying to create a peace in this situation and not supporting Ukraine, not supporting Russia, supporting the idea of peace. And I think also recognizing the truth of the situation to be able to achieve that. The second video was from Israel, and Israel has not immediately responded to US and NATO demands to sanction Russia, to provide lots of military hardware to Russia. And they seem to have been resistant thus far. But now they themselves have internal domestic policies which are being heavily criticized around the world. And maybe there'll be a compromise that they'll assist against Russia if the US stays stump with regards to their activities domestically. What's your take on the whole Israeli situation?
Well, the Israeli thing is very interesting on a number of fronts. One is that it has a very large Russian population. And because of that, it has a unique relationship with Russia. The other one is that my feeling is that there are Jewish people who are straining at the leash in horror that they have anything to do with a government that is riven by Nazis. I mean, you must remember, outside of Kiev in Babi Yar in 1942, 33,000 Jews were taken from their homes, brought outside Kiev, just outside Kiev, and they were executed by Nazis and banderas helping them. Now, that's how any Israeli government, could countenance supporting in any way the Ukrainian government is beyond me. My only thought is that the US is putting unbearable pressure on them. But generally speaking, Israel is able to stand up to that. But it's going to cause problems. I mean, for example, if you look at the way Jeremy Corbyn's career was destroyed by fake accusations of anti-Semitism, it was destroyed because of that, and yet we have Ukraine.
The power,
First World War, between 50 and 100,000 Jews murdered. That was way before the Nazis.
And I saw a video not too long ago of a former head of Mossad who made that point, and who said that as far as he was concerned, he would reject Zelensky and he would name Zelensky for who he's working with, and that he's shocked by it. So it does seem to be a theme in Israeli politics at the moment, where there is maybe the older generations who are closer to the Holocaust and things like that are more shocked and disturbed by developments in Ukraine than maybe the younger generation. That's just a hypothesis. I've no particular evidence of that, other than it's older people that I've seen speaking out.
Yeah, it's just that the whole anti-Semitism thing died because of Ukraine. Like, how can you accuse someone of being anti-Semitic if you support Nazis?
And it's a major contradiction. And all of those mainstream media, major outlets over the last 12 years, in particular, over 10 years, have done stories on the Nazi problem in Ukraine before this war started. And now, and many of them are still available on their own websites. And
that's right.
Now they deny that they exist.
Yeah. So, what they said before wasn't true, or what they're saying now isn't true. What they're saying now isn't true.
Yeah. John, we're going to finish up for this week. Thanks for joining us again. Do you want to finish with anything in particular?
Nothing other than my hope would be that this Bakhmut situation, if it develops and if Chaziv Yar is taken, there is not a whole lot to restrain the Russians. My hope is that at this stage, somebody will put their name forward and say, we need peace. Someone substantial.
Somebody in the Ukrainian government.
Someone in the Ukrainian government, someone in the EU, to break this spell, you know, that Ukraine is a Cinderella country and we almost mind it, you know, when we can see that it's just the same as us, it's just the same as everybody else. There's nothing special about it, and certainly not special enough to go to war for it.
At a global level. John Moran, thanks for joining us again this week, and we'll speak to you next week, please God.
My pleasure, Finbar.